Awusiamra shebeja fie de aye House of Records. Enti wutimi an kan sembia nto trabra ni nyina so. Na wo de propaganda wurawura ma shebeja fie a oto bedadi. Na eno na honorable aye abena Asare. Ene wama chesauto force ni NDC. Omo ho asisi omo papa wo mra shebeja fie ho. Sre ensem a chese debate start your mobile budget debate ni ade ase and tro no mpeso mutwa eno eno otumra no wache di nesi na unim say ya asem a honorable aye Fatima to abu aka attack say NDC because of brofunti no omadane minority wa parliament house wo na honorable de wan tenasi eno expose NDC big time just tin sama moga kuranya monni wunya mo ferenti entro mutwa anamo kase we a ade chamadane ne kwa ha ade chamne nam ha na je se mama kontompo enedi ade wo NDC mu na busia ede na nei NDC akokan yenim se ato forcing be kasa ye de ensam ne bebre na ba bontin na mprempren no wo kasa je se wo NDC ni bia watewa na nima dobre no osu because ensam wo kan na no kura be dadi no bo se eya na senate ya na kate ahwo ya ibre ni entie na onso kira adwe de ekoso omra hye be fie.
Mr. Speaker, and I'm really delighted to see you in the chair. You see how my brother was struggling to debate on their own budgets. Clearly, you now understand that there is a big problem. Mr. Speaker, just last week, my own friend and brother, Honorable Ato Forsen, came to the House to paint a very gloomy picture of the economy, forgetting that we all live in a global village. And so whatever happens globally also affects Ghana. Mr. Speaker, in the year 2021, the world's economic growth rate declined from 6.3% to 3.2% in 2024. Advanced economies also saw their economies declining from 5.5% in 2021 to 1.7% in 2024. And here comes Ghana, who is also part of the global economy. We saw our economy coming down from the 5.5% in 2021 to 5.7% in 2024. Instead of acknowledging this, you come and then you paint a gloomy picture, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, clearly, Ghana is the envy of the advanced economies and the world at large, with a growth rate of 5.7%. Mr. Speaker, let me remind my brothers on the other side that when they were leaving government in 2016, what was their growth rate? 3.6% against a revised target of 4.1%. Mr. Speaker, when you also go to page 8 of the budget, in page 8 of the budget, the minister acknowledges that inflation is a real concern in the ECOWAS region. And Ghana is also part of the ECOWAS region. And so minister comes here to paint a picture as if Ghana is not part of the ECOWAS region, and we are all trying very hard to tame or bring down inflation. Mr. Speaker, from 2022, we brought inflation down from 54% to 23.8% in December 2024. Mr. Speaker, ask them, prior to 2016, and all the 3 years to 2016, Mr. Speaker, they never went through what we had to go through. But what happened? In March 2016, their inflation was 19.2%. And in December 2016, all they could do was to bring it down to a few basis points, to 15.4%. They missed their target of less than 11% of inflation. So please, you should know better. Mr. Speaker, again, my brother on the other side, Honorable Adongo, mentioned the fact that we are not going to borrow, but yet in your budgets, you have 700 million coming from IMF and 600 million coming from the World Bank. What is that? Is that free money or is that your own money in US dollars? I always tell people that the devil is in the detail. Always look in the appendices and then you find what they mean by that. Mr. Speaker, again, in 2016, this government increased their debt from 2009 to 2016 by 20 billion. And what did this result in? It resulted in a dip in the GDP by 8.8 billion Ghana cedis. This same 20 billion is what we put on our debt from 2017 to 2024. And what did we do? We rather added $20 billion to our GDP. Now GDP is 1.2 trillion Ghana cedis. 1.2 trillion Ghana cedis. I know they always come up with one thing or the other, but facts are sacred, Mr. Speaker, and it has found its way in their budget. Mr. Speaker, let me come to one thing that is really of a bother to me. I heard my former minister talk about it, and I also want to talk about it. That is the issue of expenditure. Mr. Speaker, they presented to us, to the people of Ghana, that this government is a government that was going to rationalize expenditure and cut waste. But Mr. Speaker, they should tell us, where in this budget have they rationalized expenditure? Where in this budget have they cut waste? Rather, they have sought to add 43.5 billion Ghana cedis to the expenditure budget. This is not Abner saying it. This is your budget speaking to that. Mr. Speaker, they are hoping that at the end of appropriation, we will give them the permission to spend 290 billion Ghana cedis. When, Mr. Speaker, this year is not an election year, so there are certain expenditures that they are not going to incur. We, in an election year, did an appropriation of 250 billion. So when you come and you tell Ghanaians that you are rationalizing expenditure and you are cutting waste, what are you doing? Nothing. Mr. Speaker, again, to be honest with you, I was hoping that the NDC would take advantage of the goodwill that the Ghanaians gave to them and voted massively for them to really show us some real cuts that will promote fiscal discipline and endear economic growth. But what have we seen? Spending spree, Mr. Speaker, spending spree. Most of this is being seen in fattened salaries at the office of the president, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was hoping that they will come and then claim the waste in the system. They claim there was waste in the system in 2024. So I was hoping that they will come and cut things and make sure that the people of Ghana, get what is due them. But Mr. Speaker, what do we see? We see 2.7 billion increase in the office of the president's salaries alone. And then they want to explain it away with the fact that it is Ministry of Information that they added. There are 76 directors and staff that they added from the Ministry of Information that has resulted in that huge 2.7 billion allocation to them. But Mr. Speaker, facts are sacred. When you look at the budget for OGM in 2024, SIGA was part of OGM. The Internal Audit Agency was part of OGM. Mr. Speaker, Scholarship Secretariat was part of OGM. There were quite a number of ministries as well as the development authorities. They were all part of OGM. But today, they are no more under OGM. So you ask yourself, all these ministries have been scrapped or agencies have been taken. How come you still have 2.7 billion under Office of Government Machinery? Mr. Speaker, they also explained that they added Ministry of the National Security Ministry. But Mr. Speaker, in 2024, the compensation for national security was 1.28 billion Ghana cedis. So that assuming that you add your 10% to it, give or take, let's say it comes to 1.45 billion, and you add the existing 326 million to it, you still have $1 billion to explain to Ghanaians. Mr. Speaker, is this the lean government the president talked about? That's fine, okay. To the optics, I will reduce the number of ministers I nominate to the optics. But in the real deal, I will fatten the salaries of my officials and make sure they live well at the expense of other Ghanaians. Mr. Speaker, again, let me also speak to the fact that the big push and other initiatives, Mr. Speaker, there were already existing initiatives that I believe if this government had continued, it would have served a very good purpose. One is the Youth Start. The Youth Start was an initiative that was addressing problems of the youth and the SMEs. And they were adding on to growth because they found themselves in the productive sector of the economy. But Mr. Speaker, funds have been taken from USTART and they have been given to the National Apprenticeship. Sorry, funds have been taken from 1D, 1F, which was allocated just 120 million in 2024 to help boost the economy. And we have given National Apprenticeship 300 million Ghana cedis. You ask yourself, look at the amount of jobs, the number of jobs 1D, 1F provided, more than 200,000 jobs. These are permanent jobs. And then we are now going to do what? Spend 300 million for National Apprenticeship, where after the apprenticeship, where are they going to find the jobs, to engage in? Mr. Speaker, so this is what we say, that it is not about cutting expenditure, but rather promoting wasteful expenditure. Mr. Speaker, one thing I also find interesting is that my people on the other side, and they come up with fanciful names for some existing initiatives. Mr. Speaker, everybody knows the year of return in the diaspora. It's a big thing. They claim they want to reset the economy, and they just change it to what? Black Star Experience. Interesting. Year of return. It has more meaning than just what? Black Star Experience. What's the meaning of that? Mr. Speaker, before I sit, I also want to talk about the fact that the minister raised concerns about the state enterprises and the fact that they should do more to make sure they encourage reforms and make state enterprises fit for purpose. So I was thinking that just as they saw the National Apprenticeship as a very important thing and gave it 300 million, they would have also given SIGA, which is the agency to take care of state-owned enterprises, some money. Mr. Speaker, in the budget, it is just 50 million Ghana cedis. Meanwhile, we have close to 2.7 billion Ghana cedis at the office of the president. How then do you want the state-owned enterprises to reform and then to function as they are supposed to function? Mr. Speaker, I also heard my brother on the other side say that, oh, they are social democrats. Yes, social democrats government. Mr. Speaker, social democrats, you are supposed to make the poor and the vulnerable the heartbeat of all your policies. But what do we see here, Mr. Speaker? Clearly, in the 2024 budget, Mr. Speaker, for human trafficking fund and the domestic violence fund, we gave 2.7 million Ghana cedis for the domestic violence fund. Ask me how much they have allocated for this. A social democratic party, they have put in just 337,000 Ghana cedis. A social democrat, 337,000 Ghana cedis. I thought your heartbeat was the poor and the vulnerable, Mr. Speaker. And then when you go to the human trafficking fund too, they reduced it from 2.41 million Ghana cedis in 2024 to an abysmal 497,000 Ghana cedis. And Mr. Speaker, they claim they are social democrats. Is this champagne democrats or what, Mr. Speaker? They have to come again. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one other thing that I noticed that was missing in the minister's speech, because usually all ministers do that, is to give an update on the sectorial performance of every ministry. But this was absent because what? The minister feels that if he should come and update Ghanaians on all the positive influences, the positive policies that you have churned out, it will erase that notion that they've been trying to build. That notion that this economy is not performing, the notion that this economy is dead, it will erase that notion. And so he decided to avoid the updates. And majority leader is saying us that the sector ministers will come and update us. We had wanted it in the minister's speech as well, because that is what has been done, or that is what is done every day. Mr. Speaker, yes, in conclusion, I just want to say that ultimately they failed to recognize in their updates that we moved GDP from 219 billion Ghana cedis to 1.2 trillion in December 2024. Mr. Speaker, they failed to recognize that we invested and connected 276 communities to the national grid in 2024. Mr. Speaker, they failed to recognize that we completed 1,072 units of affordable housing with the TDC. Mr. Speaker, they failed to also let Ghanaians know that we invested in the phase 2 of the Temamoto Way roundabout, and also we invested in the construction of the flyover and the flyover that leads to East Legon and the Spintex Road. Mr. Speaker, they failed, but Ghanaians have seen all that. So, Mr. Speaker, Finally, I just want to conclude by saying that isn't it a shame, Mr. Speaker, isn't it a shame that the policies that they talked about so much, the 24-hour economy, did not find any meaningful expression in this budget. Rather, we are being told to go and come back again, and that we should give it another week to bring it back. And Mr. Speaker, isn't it scary that no feasibility studies has been done, yet government decides to push our oil revenues close to 13.8 billion, our oil revenues and our mineral revenues, 13.8 billion, to a policy that, Mr. Speaker, they did not bring any framework for us to implement it. Rather, for the oil revenues, Mr. Speaker, it was funding free SHS. It was funding the second phase of the motorway. It was also going to fund the Agenda 111 that they are refusing to talk about. Mr. Speaker, so you ask yourself, clearly, this budget is all talk and